Yes, I think you can hear me clearly. What I'd like to do, first of all, is ask each of the panelists to give a brief introduction of themselves, who they work for, and what particular field they work in. So if you could start off, Jacinto.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Paquito. I'm working as a head project manager for Sharjah Electricity and Water Authority as under the PMO Executive Office. I've been here in the Middle East for 30 years, 10 years in Oman and 20 years now here in the UAE. And mostly I've been involved in variety of disciplines from irrigation and landscaping to building construction and also infrastructure. Electricity and water network, including drainage system and RO plants, and STP as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Barry. Thank you, everyone. My name is Mohammad Najam. I'm from Abu Dhabi Municipality, working as a technical advisor in road, bridges, infrastructure. I have been there with the municipality 8 years and in the country around 13 years, on total of 22 or 23 years of experience. I am a certified value specialist, AVS, Associate Value Specialist, and actively involved in Abu Dhabi Municipality for implementing and writing procedures with regards to value engineering.
Hello everyone, my name is Majid Ideisan. I've been part of the Roads Department at the Ministry of Infrastructure Development for 4 years. I'm more involved in sustainability and development of current infrastructure, and more specifically the federal roads network.
My name is Frederic Legeron. I'm a Vice President at Parsons. I'm in the region for the last 5 years where I manage large infrastructure projects such as expressways and big structures. Before that, I worked in Canada, the US, and a number of European countries as well.
My name is Rob Kennedy. I'm the Infrastructure Director for Cundall in the Middle East. I've been in the region now for 3 years. I've been in the industry for just over 20 years now, with my experience spanning from military engineering to contracting to my current role in Cundall that I've been for 12 years as a consultant.
Good morning, my name is Chris Venmore. I'm also an Infrastructure Director for AECOM, or as the Americans call it, AECOM. I've been in the Gulf for around 18 years, just clocked up 30 years of experience, purely in infrastructure. In the 18 years that I've been in the Middle East, I've been mainly focused on things like roads, bridges, sewage treatment plants, that sort of infrastructure.
Okay, thanks very much, guys. I first worked in the Middle East a long time ago, but I came back here to live only 5 weeks ago. So I'm still adjusting to the way things are done here. But one of the things I have found is that value engineering is something that is discussed in every conference, almost in every part of the world, and the same things are discussed every year. Nothing seems to change. And if nothing changes, nothing will change. So we do need to make some changes in the way we do things. Otherwise, we're not going to increase or improve our efficiencies. Infrastructure itself is a bit more complex, I think, than developing buildings, because you're trying to develop something for a future which is not really that clear and could change instantly. So creating value and flexibility is a specific challenge for infrastructure. A couple of the key words I took from the previous discussion was about trust and change. You have to have trust in your designers, so that whatever you're developing, if you pick a design team, have trust in them. Because if you don't, there's always going to be, the interaction will never run smoothly, and there'll always be an insecurity. And the designers from their side have to be flexible and understand that if things do change, they have to have an open mind. So when I moved to India 7 years ago, if any of you have been to India, it is a massive country with massive infrastructure problems. And I lived in a city called Gurgaon, which had 12 million people. And they developed the city, then developed the infrastructure. And I thought that was quite a smart way of doing it because they didn't waste money on infrastructure. But from a policy of getting around the place and wanting to live there, it was a terrible place to live. So I'd like to ask, first of all, Frederic to just answer, in his experience, why do we need to carry out VE? Does it mean that the wrong team have been selected? Or is somebody missing from the team? Or is the client briefing correct? In your experience, Frederic, what is the reason behind needing VE?
Well, I mean, obviously we do see like a little bit of, engineering that can be improved, but most of the time engineering is, even if the teams are doing a very fantastic job, there are still opportunities to value engineering project. I think when you look at this, the design process is a very iterative process where we take a number of decisions on the daily basis, right? We select this type of structure, that type of road, pavement, and everything. And at one point, we need to sit down, look at everything, and see if everything is working together and see if there is place for improvement, right? I'll give an example. For example, Parsons, we work a lot in design and build. Okay, it's a like of procurement method that's when we talk about value engineering, this is very aggressive in terms of value engineering. And recently we did a project. There was a lot of structures, maybe 100 structures in the project, so it's a lot of things to do. If we look at each structure separately, we'll have a different type of structure, right? I mean, every structure will be optimized for its own location, span, length, type, whatever. But when we work with a contractor, they'll think about differently, right? They think about, it has to be standardized because I don't want to do a different structure every time. I want to have something that can reuse from one structure to another. So basically, what we look at is maybe each structure is individually not optimum. It might be that none of the structure is optimum individually, but globally, when we look at the overall project, all of a sudden it becomes a very optimum project for the contractor. So I think this is something that when we do value engineering, we have, every time we do some progress, some design, we have to sit down, look at the overall picture, and talk to the client and see what can be done. Other example that comes to mind is like maybe sometimes, in some of the project we had some interchange, very big interchange, and we do a very fantastic design for these interchanges. But when we're at the end of the day, the cost might be a little high, or maybe there is some issues, right? So we look at the project, and even if everybody in the room has provided the best engineering, the best things, there is still places for optimize the project to find some new ways to, for example, connect some road and change the configuration of interchange. We have some project where we change totally the configuration of interchange and reducing the cost very significantly because of just the optimization of the overall shape of the interchange. And this is possible where we have already one solution. We get one solution, we look at it and we say, okay, maybe there is another way to do the same thing. We look again and we find another way. So it's not because we did a bad job the first time, it's just because we took decision going forward, and when we are at the end of the day, we can optimize or change a couple of things.
So what spurs you to look at it again? What was the decision that made you re-examine your original solution?
Well, most of the time it's always, when we work with clients, most of the time it's budget constraints, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and sometimes, it just to make sure, the client just want to make sure that he's spending his money, he has value for the money he's spending, right? So at the end of the process, you look at it and you make, even if you have done a fantastic job and the project is perfect, which is very common, obviously. At the same time, looking at this and making sure, even for the client, that he has really value for money, re-examining all the big decisions we have taken on the project, I think brings value overall to this process. So sometimes we do find some very good value engineering that will reduce the cost. Sometimes we don't. Sometimes also there is some little thing that can be improved, for example, for accessibility, for maintenance, and all this kind of stuff that on the project have very little impact in terms of cost, but on the overall duration of the project really brings a lot of value to the project because you had, for example, a service area in a big expressway, you had a service area, everybody will be able to use it. It has almost no cost. You can, optimize the retail space and everything to make it commercially viable. And at the end of the day, it's a very great service for the people that are going to use the road. So I think there is different things you can do in value engineering. First of all, make sure that you have value for the money you're spending. You confirm the client. Second of all, you can optimize all the parameters together. Constructability, budget, schedule, everything is going together. And also, sometimes you find some very nice thing to improve the project with very minimal cost.
So how accurate are your client predictions on the briefing of what you're designing for in the future? So if you're designing a big road interchange, it's based on a certain estimation of the traffic, the development in the area. Does that cause problems? Because it's specific to infrastructure?
It's a very good question. I mean, we had many projects in the region where the client starts with very high level of traffic. I mean, we look at this, we say, okay, this is going to be 6 lane by 6 lane, big interchange and everything. And we come back to, to the drawing board, and there is a value engineering that has to be done. Is this development going to arrive? If yes, it's going to arrive. Is it going to arrive that fast that we have to construct everything at the first time? Or can we phase it? And most of the time, working with clients, we can actually phase the development. So the investment, the initial investment is not that, important or large that it was supposed to be initially. And also by predicting on the future, we can make sure this is going to be easy to, improve the capacity of the interchange, for example, or the road. If we don't think about it right now, it might be very difficult in 20 years to actually improve the capacity of these facilities.
In one short sentence, what is the biggest challenge you've faced in infrastructure design?
Okay, if you talk about myself,
Yourself, yeah.
As a design team, I mean, it's often like challenging our own engineers,
Yeah.
Our engineers are very good. They're very smart. I'm an engineer. We're all very smart.
Yeah.
But I mean, sometimes we really have to push people to go beyond their comfort zone and find solution that is not their first solution,
Yeah.
I mean, there is somebody, I think, in the previous panel talked about ego, and it's something we really face because engineer is very proud of his work, and we have to really challenge him and making sure there is no other way to do this.
Okay. We'll move on now. I'll ask Mohammad Khan to just give his experience on value engineering, at what time it should be implemented, who should be involved, and who do you think should lead it?
Thank you.
And also experiences from projects you've done. Yeah?
Thank you. Actually, this is a very important and very practical question. And I would like to take the first part of the question. What is my experience on this? Basically, what I understand, even from the previous session and the sessions going on, different perspective of the value engineering. What I learned from my training, my certification from SEWA International, that value engineering is not about cutting cost, quality, or just another quality tool, or another constructability review. These are not the things. Value engineering, to my perspective, is a systematic process to be undertaken on a project during different stages in a sequential activity manner through a workshop. At the end of the workshop, whether you come up with a saving or you don't come with the saving, doesn't matter. But usually you come up with the saving because the process is so structured, so uniformly applied. If I give you an example of Federation Highway Agency or even Abu Dhabi Municipality, so if I give you the FHWA example, they have conducted around 1,000 studies over a period of 2012 to 2016, 5 years. Out of 1,000 studies, they came up to save $50 million, which is on around 100 billion worth of the project, which results around 5% saving. So when you do a structured value engineering, you can save around 5 to 10%. Abu Dhabi Municipality has implemented value engineering also for the last 4 years, but as a conventional approach, not as a structured approach. And we also came up with a cost reduction and saving around 15 to 30%. We have some examples I can share with you later in the discussion. Now come back to your second question. What is the right time to apply? There is nothing specified in terms of the structured process when to apply. Value engineering can be applied any point, any stage or phase of a project life cycle, provided you feel that there is enough potential for cost saving or added value to justify your cost of the value study and the time and effort you invested. I'll give you one theoretical example for that, like why we should do, however, value engineering should be applied as early as possible, as we already discussed this subject in the previous discussion. Why the value engineering should be applied early? Because by definition of value equation, which is called function over cost. So the objective of the value study is to increase the function of a project and reduce the cost, while performance, quality, and safety needs are unchanged. This is the fundamental of that. So you can change the function and the cost early in the project because it will have less impact on the project delivery schedule. The changes are easily accepted by the client, so the damages or the problems are much lesser. So it should be applied as early as possible. And also, there are greater potential for change, and change costs less to implement at early stages. The cost savings is higher, but if the early opportunities are missed, you can still apply value engineering any point, construction phase or even the final design phase or earlier. But studies has shown the ability to influence the value for money reduces with the project time. As the project increases, the cost saving reduces. So from that perspective, the best way to apply value engineering is at a concept level. And when we prepare, Abu Dhabi Municipality prepared a specific guideline on that subject. It details all the things, when to do and how to do and all these things. Although the guidelines are not yet published because it is under currently review with QCC and it's not publicly open, available. Now I'm coming to the second part of your question. Who should lead the value engineering and what are the team look likes? Basically, value engineering is undertaken in a workshop, which is typically 3 to 5 days, depending on the size of the scale of the project, by a experienced professional who is leading the workshop and who is a CVA certified value specialist. It is the highest certification in this line. The team leader has a responsibility to lead the team and make sure the structured process which has been invented or discovered by SEWA International has been followed throughout the process. And then the value engineering team, which also a group of people or participants who are a multidisciplinary team and they have expertise in their disciplines, they should be involved in conducting the value engineering. One thing is important here, the team preferably or ideally be independent of the design team. Because if the design people involve the same thing, you will get the same results. But value engineering is a different process. You sit in a closed room in a workshop, 5 to 10 people, do the sequential activities in 3 stages and 6 phases, which is called information, functional analysis, creative phase, development phase, like that. And then you come up with the results and you show your results to your project manager or the client. Okay, this is the outcome of the value study, or these are the recommendations. Recommendations may be accepted, may not be accepted. Usually they are accepted and results in adding value and saving cost. So, but Abu Dhabi Municipality, when they prepare this criteria for selecting the value engineering team and the team leader, they did not put this requirement that the team leader should be a CVS, because this is a high requirement. Not many CVS available here in this region actually. It's a tough process to obtain those certifications. So they say that even if you are AVS, Associate Value Specialist, or VMA, Value Management Associate, you can still lead the team, provided you have done 3 value engineering studies. And other than that, there are other qualities which the team member should have, as interpersonal skills, decision making, teamwork to achieve a common objective. So to sum up the whole question, value engineering should be undertaken any point in a project life cycle, but better if it can be taken as early as possible by a multidisciplinary team and led by a team leader who is CVS certified to maximize the value of a project.
Okay, it's interesting. I never knew there was specialists in value engineering to lead the team along the right direction, because most projects, it's either a project manager or a client or somebody involved with the project who is looking inwards rather than outwards. So it seems a good idea. I don't know if anybody else has had experience with value engineering management on projects in the panel that can add anything. Anybody? No? Okay. We'll move on to Chris. Chris, again, part of the process, and Mohammad has answered some of it. When should it be starting a project? Should it be continuous or stages? And who should be involved? Should it look purely at capital costs, or where are the benefits in infrastructure in looking at operating costs? And what's your experience from projects you've been involved in? Are clients willing to pay more and see value at the end of the project?
Yeah, that's a difficult. Are clients willing to pay more? I think for infrastructure, value engineering means something different, or slightly, you've got to approach it slightly in a different way to, especially things like MEP and buildings. You know, for infrastructure, as a minimum, you're looking at 25 to 30 years life. You know, for things like bridges, you can be looking up to 120 years life. So the OPEX of these structures and this infrastructure, can far outweigh the actual front-end capex, especially where things like sewage treatment, where you're using chemicals and things like that. So I think value engineering for infrastructure should very much focus on the whole life cycle costs, right to the end, even down to the demolition and replacement, eventual replacement of the asset. And I can actually give a couple of good examples of this in that back in the 90s, I was working in the UK, and we had a thing called the Urban Wastewater Directive, which meant that a lot of sewage treatment plants had to be built in a very short period of time. And I actually got to see plants built under different procurement techniques. So these are effectively the same size of plant, built under the same general specifications, but just built under completely different procurement routes. If you looked at a plant that was procured under something like a boot scheme, where the contractor not only had to pay the cost of the construction, but he then had a concession for 25 years to maintain that plant up to a set standard. And at the end of 25 years, he had to leave the plant in a reasonable standard as well. And then you compared that to a plant that had been built purely under the traditional designer, contractor, sort of red book type arrangement. The plant that the client ended up with was completely different. The contractors would invest in things that reduced things like the use of chlorine, reduce of polymers. They would actively go for more expensive capex. In fact, quite a lot of these plants were costing 20% more from a capex perspective than the ones that were procured under the same specifications than those. So what you were seeing is that with the traditional route, you used to get the minimum standard. The contractor obviously he's had to tender and win this in competition. So he's not adding anything in that's above the specification. Whereas a contractor that then has to think about the 25-year procurement, 25 years of operation, is going well above and beyond that, because he knows that a marginal increase in capex can save him significant amounts of money for the next 25 years. So that's an example from back in the 90s. Just a more simple example I could give is recently I was working for a operation and maintenance contractor, and we just won a new project which needed around 300 staff, and we needed to buy around 90 vehicles, 90 pickup trucks. And we was going down the route of buying these, have you seen these Chinese Go Now vehicles? You know? It's a pickup, it does exactly the same job. And we looked at that and we said, well, how are we actually going to get the best value? You know, these things were around 45,000 dirhams each. And we looked at these against Toyota, which were just over 75,000 dirhams each. Now, on a pure cost basis, a pure capex cost, you're always going to buy the Go Now, because when you look on a spreadsheet, the saving is massive. You know, it's 30% saving that you're having to outlay. But when we started to look into the actual operation costs, the running costs and the residual value of those vehicles after 5 years, it actually turned itself completely on its head. The Go Now vehicles would require a lot more maintenance, and that maintenance wasn't included. Whereas with the Toyota, you had a 5-year, 250,000 kilometer warranty. And at the end of those 5 years, when your vehicles, we'd estimated that they'd do around 150 to 200,000 kilometers in that time, the Go Now vehicles would be completely shot. We would be lucky to have got them to the 5-year mark, and then they'd be worthless. We'd scrap them, scrap value. Whereas the Toyotas, we could actually sell, you know, to replenish, and we would get back a reasonable amount. So I mean, that's just a very basic example of where VE, you know, especially for infrastructure, can actually increase the capital cost, because you're looking at a 25, 50, 100-year saving, and especially for government and government organisations who are going to be around, and they're going to be the owners of these assets. You know, I definitely think that that value engineering, you know, when looking at the whole life cycle cost, can actually increase your capex. In fact, it should increase your capex, because you should be going for that quality and looking at those 25, those 50 years' time.
Is there any difference between the approach from governments or private bodies in infrastructure you found?
Yeah, I think from a private perspective, obviously, you know, where you've got developers building infrastructure that they want to hand over, you know, value for them is obviously making sure that you hand over the absolute minimum cost, you know, to the government. So again, you know, from a designer's perspective, we're designing to meet the minimum standards, get that NOC ticked. So from their perspective, it's a very much different process, and that goes throughout. You know, if you've got a contractor that's won a contract in competitive tender against the specification, when they sit down to do value engineering, they're looking at maximising their profits against delivering the specification. You know, it's not in their interests in a standard contract to actually look after the client's interests. They've won it. They've now got to deliver it. So you get this very much, you know, with a procurement method like that, you get this very much, adversarial contract, where the contractor is always trying to provide the absolute minimum under the specification, and the client and the consultant are trying to push them to deliver more. So again, you don't end up with best value. So value engineering definitely is something that changes depending on the party that is actually carrying out.
Yeah. Okay, thanks Chris. Paquito.
Yes.
With so many ways of communicating nowadays, the internet, BIM as a process to help us, we still seem to see the same mistakes being made in the construction industry. Have you come across examples of where mistakes are repeated, examples of how they can be overcome? What is your own experience in value engineering in infrastructure?
Okay, so thank you very much. What I'm going to share with you is how we do it in SEWA way. Since Dr. Rashid has been appointed to become the chairman of the organization, the first thing that he had done from that time was to create the SEWA 15 principles, and you may be able to see them in the big projects publication that you have in front of you guys. You can look into it. And number one on the principle is smile. So let's make a lighter mood here. Communication. Communication really is something that is, I would say, unpredictable. It's just like what other people use in their Facebook status, simply complicated. and really it tells about itself. Why it keeps on happening, why the same failure keeps on happening. Because at times, when the client spells out what do they need in terms of value engineering, sometimes the designers would make an assumption without repeating it or without confirming it, without getting a clarification. Is this really what you want? And also, again, other issue on why it keeps on fail is perceptions. People, thank you very much for the earlier panel, as well as my co-panelists here in their earlier discussion. Again, people's perception about value engineering. When they hear the word value engineering, the first thing that comes into their mind is reducing cost, which Mohammad have said a while ago, it's not. So again, it's about improving the functionality compared to the cost. It could be that you can have the same cost for a particular equipment, but you have a better functionality. It could be integrable with the new system. It could be more smart. And what had happened earlier in some organization, or in my experience, is that the initial planning is very important as well. And as Mohammad have also said, I agree with him that value engineering can be implemented any point in time, not only during the design stage, not only the execution, but even including in the operations and maintenance. Considering our organization as providing utility services in water, electricity, and gas, we have to understand that what we are looking at here is the importance of the equipments that we need. And to avoid repeating the problem in terms of having a failure in selecting equipments at times, is that through the initiative of our chairman, we are collaborating. What we have done is we identified where we are right now, what is the demand that we need in the future, and we have a timeline. And we partnered with the leading and renowned engineering teams here to help us in creating our master plan 2030. And with that also, along with the studies that we have asked them to deliver to us, is to consider, among the gaps that we have, to identify what are the top priorities, what are those part of the project that we can carry out right now that could support the long-term plan, so that there is a sustainability and there is a continuity in terms of building up and improving our system and our activities. Because we, in electricity and water, we deal with generation, transmission, and distribution. And it's all about speaking on providing services to the general public. In Sharjah, we are catering that to about 1.5 million in a 24/7 basis. So it's really a tough thing to do. And when we look into this, we are not just, we also partnered with the leading brands that are now known to be reliable and efficient. Because we are not only looking at now at the cost. Usually, most of the organization, one of the issues that makes them resist on the value engineering, or why it fails, is that, again, cost, the immediate cost. They are looking at the immediate cost involved in implementing, for example, part of value engineering is improving the functionality, selecting a better quality or a better equipment. And to that, there is an additional cost. It would be a higher cost. And the resistance is that, okay, why should I spend it now? But the way we are looking at is we always consider the life cycle. And do we get back that? And to that basis, we are considering the best quality that are available, that are reliable, that are efficient. And this helps us improve in terms of providing a better service to the general public.
Have you introduced anything specifically in your procurement and design process to address getting the best value?
Yes, basically in our procurement process, we made sure now that the equipments to be used are star-rated equipments, the latest and available equipments and materials in the market, rather than just looking at the cheapest or the most economical. Well, as a designer, we should always look at the best material or equipment available in the market with the cheapest cost or lowest cost, not the cheapest. And at times also we are not just looking at the cheapest cost or lowest cost on the project, but what can give us more value, okay? Not only to us financially, but to the general public, to the experience they will get, to the service that they will get from us.
Yeah. Okay, thanks very much. Rob, question for you. In innovation, is it stifled by the nature of infrastructure, or are there innovative ways of dealing with things that you've come across that can actually help provide flexibility, longer life in the way in which you design the infrastructure?
Well, as designers, we have the benefit of policy. And policy, it defines the parameters and gives us a roadmap as to how we should design for the future. But I don't think we should be afraid of unpredictability or predictability to a lesser or greater extent. It's something that we deal with on a day-to-day basis within the industry. For example, if climate change is a big one. So we may have a critical system development on a coastal front, and we need to consider, how we mitigate and how we plan for the future for tidal surge. Or more looking into the physical infrastructure and development, we'll need to mitigate and plan for where there could be future expansion. So we need to know how to route our utilities to make sure that we have minimal abortive works in the future. So for me, that's a real area where we can add value in collaborative thinking and pulling the client in towards the design process and understanding the life cycle of the product itself. But just sort of touching on, Chris mentioned a few things about build, operate, transfer type arrangements with infrastructure plant. I think it's very interesting. Plus, as well, we were discussing just before this about how we procure our infrastructure. And for me, when we're talking about value of a project, energy from waste is something that we really should be paying more and more attention to, because fundamentally we're solving two problems. We're taking something that can be an environmental issue and we're turning something into a commodity, which in itself presents value. Now, the value can only genuinely be realized over the full life cycle of a project, but let's not forget we're in a world where we can now generate protein from methane, edible protein. So, if we take that and we think about a practical application or a practical example, and let's say there was a mandate to develop an agricultural holding within the region, and let's say we also had existing landfill. Well, if we mesh those two together, and we can look at ways of harnessing methane, which would otherwise be going up into the atmosphere, so we'd be solving one problem whilst generating a resource and a commodity. So we'd be generating edible protein that could be used in the process. So they're really the ways that I like to look at where you can add value, but they can only really be realized if you get early engagement and early procurement in a build, operate, transfer type arrangement. But it's not just that. There's many other technologies, and we utilize many other energy from waste technologies, incineration, anaerobic digestion, gasification, in-vessel composting. But I think we tend to look at those as projects on their own, rather than integrating energy from waste into a project to benefit a single development.
Yeah.
In incineration, for example, I mean, we consider incineration as, these big, hulking, great facilities, but, we can have sort of smaller integrated waste facilities which can take and make fuel cells that can then be taken out into the wider industry to use in like cement firing process and the like. And I think they're really areas where you can add value, but it involves that early engagement and that strategy and collaborative thinking.
When you get involved in a project where you want to introduce these ideas, how available is the information on what waste is generated on the site in surrounding areas that may be useful for other uses that you otherwise would have to bring new material in? Do you struggle to find it, or is it readily available?
It's a very interesting question, and the answer probably is that the waste stream itself and the matrix of the waste stream generally determines the technology that you may want to adopt. So that's generally how you would go about it. So if we know what waste is available, then we can tailor the technology to suit. I mean, for example, the example you gave about the methane to protein, it's a very specific example, but it really highlights the advances that are being made in innovation, value, that truly generate value in infrastructure.
Okay, thanks very much. We'll move on to Majid, who has stepped in at the last minute, as I mentioned earlier, but I understand you're going to give us a small case study example of some roads that you were involved in where you carried out VE. So if you could just explain what you did and how it benefited the projects, Majid.
Yeah, well, before speaking about that specific example, I'd like to address one point, which is that value engineering, yes, it can be implemented at any stage of the project. Nevertheless, the most critical stage is during the execution. That is based, as he mentioned earlier, it is more dependent on the type of the contract you're having. So in many cases, it's none of the contractor's interest to implement value engineering, where he can meet the minimum specifications. So now moving forwards to more performance-based contracts, you are not focusing anymore on a certain approach or a certain product. You're focusing on key performance indicators that manage the whole project and keeps it open for any value engineering implementation. One example that we faced during the execution of Kalba Ring Road that connects Fujairah to whoever's moving from Dubai to Fujairah. During the second phase of the construction of that highway, we faced an issue that it came during the summertime, and you have in that period more restrictions during the working hours for the operators on site. Yeah. And then at that stage, we've decided to integrate automated machinery with all the graders, dozers, all the machinery based on site. And with that, we basically, what happens is that you have at your traditional stage, you have a certain operator with the machinery with several surveyors around him taking points and making sure he's following out the correct measurements. With the updated procedure, you have imported data into the machinery, and you can see all the graders on site almost hitting the third gear and finishing the work on time. And we faced amazing results with that integration of around 35% reduction in time for the completion of that stage. So yeah, and
so was that implemented in advance or when you realized you had a problem?
Well, no, it wasn't at an earlier stage prepared for. It was implemented during the execution of the project. Okay. And this brings us to the earlier point I mentioned, which is value engineering is, of course, as a function or a ratio of performance to cost. But before that, it also depends on the professional relationship between the client and the contractor, as well as the contract you are having in the first place. And by that time, once you have managed that procedure, you'll be able to implement value engineering in the best case. And another small example is at the stage of tendering for one of the street lighting projects. Before that, it was prepared to be done as an LED retrofitting. Then the contract and the tenders was changed into just energy reduction. And I've seen that most of the submittals were only focusing on LEDs, and they were focusing on certain products. But the point is now to stick to one criteria and to stick to certain performance to be expected by the contractor to be implemented. And with that in mind, you'll give more space to the implementation of value engineering.
Yeah. Okay, thanks very much. I'm not sure how we're going for time, but if we could open up to questions from the audience, if anybody's got anything they'd like to ask any of the panel, if you'd like to stand up and give your name and state who you'd like to answer the question. Any questions?
Yep, got one there.
Hi, Hazard. My name is Peter. I work for AST, a little marine contractor in town. So I'd like to reiterate what's been said again and again, is that in order for VE to take place, there needs to be a solid circle of trust between the employer, the engineer, and the contractor. From a contractor's perspective, we usually begin our VE after the contract award. And what I would note is that VE is not free. It costs. And from a contractor's perspective, it costs us money and it costs us time, which is usually, we can't recover that from the client, which is, but when we get to who is the benefactor of that VE, usually the client wants a piece of the action, but hasn't paid for any of it, which is an interesting one. A question that I would like to put to the panel is, where does conventional good engineering stop and VE start? For instance, a project that Chris and I are involved in at the moment, there's an instance where we had to design pavement. Now, in the tender design, there was 100 mil paver and a certain thickness of subgrade. During the design, AECOM managed to engineer it in such a way that in certain areas we could reduce the pavement thickness and reduce the layers, and in other areas we had to increase the thickness of the sub-base. The net result was a saving, but in my mind that was design development, and in the client's eyes that was value engineering. But where is the line?
Who would like to answer that one?
Can I comment on it? Yeah. Actually, this is a very interesting question and very important question as well. And everybody is really looking for what is the practical applicability. That's why in my discussion I mentioned that value engineering can be applied any point of time in a project life cycle. Design is very good if you apply and save and then do alternative methods and techniques and all. But let's talk about construction. In construction, value engineering you can apply. And it is the terminology is used is VECP. The value engineering change proposal. So the idea there is a contractor propose alternative options because they have new machines, new materials, new techniques, experience. They come up with, let us say, 20% cost reduction or 10% cost reduction. And then they share the money with the client. So it is a win-win situation. This is one scenario. Other scenario, if the value engineering is done during the design phases, so it is done through the technical workshops. In the workshop, the client is there, consultant is there, technical experts there, even sometimes contractor is also there. So in a closed room, without any prejudice or personal interest, all work towards problem solving and saving money through innovative and creative ways, because this is the way the structure is a structured approach goes into phases. Information phase, when you collect information, function, you study each function, what project elements they do. And then you see how else this function can be achieved. That's the whole idea basically. And then in the creative phase, which is the third day possibly or fourth day in the workshop, then you come up alternative solution, and while all sitting on the same room, and they're all agreeing to the option. So at the end of the day, or at the end of the workshop, you realize agreed recommendation where there is a consensus among all. Practically, sometimes it is not possible, but when you lay your contract in such a way, then things can be covered.
I'd just add to that a little bit in that I think that needs to change. Sorry, this is coming off. We need to change the way in which we procure projects for that to happen. Or you have to have contractors who are willing to provide some of their time and expertise free of charge, which they shouldn't have to do. So the contractors should be paid for giving that practical input at an early stage, or become part of the team that's going to see the project all the way through.
Just one other thing I would like to bring up, especially for sort of government agencies that invest in roads and bridges, is one thing that I think should be brought into the equation is also the cost of downtime on the economy. You know, if you're building a bridge and you build it with cheap materials, that means that in 20 years it's going to have to either undergo serious maintenance or complete replacement. You know, the cost to the economy is not just the cost of replacing the bridge. The cost is in all the delays, all the diversions, all of that time which is wasted by, you know, thousands and thousands of people has a cost. You know, people take longer to get to their business meetings or whatever. A good example I've got of this is, you know, Dubai Mall, fantastic mall. I don't go there because I just can't abide the 30 minutes it takes me to get in, and then the 30 minutes it takes me, if I'm lucky, to get back out again. You know, we've just had a client recently where we did a VE on his access for his new mall, and we more than tripled the cost of the roads and bridges that were going to his mall, just because of things like that. So that when his mall is constructed, when it's finished, he's actually going to be able to get people in very quickly, very easily, and get them out very quickly and very easily. And I know that me and a lot of other people would rather go to a mall where we can drive straight in, pick which level of the parking that we want to actually enter in, nearest to the shops that we want to actually go to, spend our money, and then leave in a quick manner. That again is another example of where VE actually increased the capital cost for the longer term benefits.
And it would have made the project more successful. But
hopefully.
the issue is convincing the client, isn't it?
They're building it now, so they're spending the money on the roads and the bridges to get in. So for this, just to give you some detail, for this mall, originally it was all grade level access with one underpass. We've ended up putting 2 kilometres of bridge around the mall to give access to different levels of the parking. And I mean, 2 kilometres of road bridge is not a small undertaking in capital cost.
So what got cut to pay for that?
Yeah, that's always the issue. But hopefully, I mean, or you know, from a financial perspective, the client will get that money back.
Yeah.
In that people will be able to pay, pay a premium for the real estate within his mall, because he's getting a lot more footfall through the mall, because people will pop in for quicker visits. It doesn't have to be you don't have to go for 4 hours. Or 5 hours just to get the value of driving in and driving out. You know, you can just pop in for 20 minutes because you know that you're going to be able to get out again quickly.
That's a great example, Chris.
Thanks.
Great example. Any more questions?
I think we're just running out of time. So.
Okay.
Excellent.
Yeah. Okay, I'd like to thank the panelists very much for sparing the time and giving us the benefit of their experience. I mean, it is very clear that value engineering can be done and you can get value out of a project even if you have to spend more money. We do have to change, I think, the process in which we procure projects to get the full benefits. But if you'd like to just share your thanks to the panelists with myself for coming here. Thank you. Okay.